Exactly. Kavala wasn't just a steel hull with torpedoes. She was a floating technological ecosystem designed for endurance, stealth, and lethal precision. The Americans had approached submarine warfare as a combined problem of engineering, training, and logistics, rather than relying solely on bravery. A few key advantages stand out. Sensors and electronics. SJ. Surface search radar. Could detect ships at 15 miles in darkness or fog. Japanese radar was limited to 8 miles and notoriously unreliable. Communications. High-frequency radios with encryption allowed Kavala to report contacts instantly, positioning the submarine as a real-time tactical asset. Not just a hunter. Sustainability and crew health air conditioning. Protected both crew and electrical systems from tropical heat and humidity. Water distillation. 1,000 gallons of fresh water daily, allowing extended patrols without resupply. Amenities. Ice cream machine. Washing machines and personal bunks, all seemingly minor, but essential for morale during weeks submerged in extreme conditions. Crew training and redundancy. Average age 23, mostly inexperienced at sea, yet intensively trained. Cross-training. Every crew member could perform multiple critical functions: torpedo men operating engines, electricians controlling diving planes, so casualties didn't cripple operations. This meant Kavala could fight through damage and stress that would have disabled most other submarines. Industrial edge. The U.S. could produce these high-quality submarines, torpedoes and radar systems faster than Japan could counter them. Quantity was backed by quality, creating a compounding advantage. In short, Kavala was a perfect storm of technology, training, and logistics, a system designed not just to survive, but to dominate the vast Pacific theater. Every advantage, from radar to ice cream, contributed to the crew's ability to execute missions like the attack on Shokaku, June 19, 1944. 11:22 hours, Philippine Sea, 140 mi north of Yap Island. The pencil shook in Lieutenant Junior Grade Jack Kiefer's hand as he recorded the bearing in the conning tower log, his writing barely legible as the submarine USS Cavalla prepared to complete the most consequential attack in her brief history. 6 fish away, all hot, straight, and normal. Through the periscope, Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler watched his torpedoes streak toward their target. The 25,675-ton Japanese aircraft carrier Shokaku, one of the 6 carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor 30 months earlier. In seconds, those torpedoes would either cement Kavala's place in naval history or doom her crew to a crushing depth charge retaliation from the carriers. Escorts Kossler's torpedo salvo wasn't just a single strike, it was a ripple in a much larger system, a chain reaction that would culminate in the Marianas Turkey Shoot. In that moment, the Pacific War wasn't decided by abstract plans or political decrees. It was being shaped by the intimate mechanics of submarine warfare. Approach angles calculated in the dark, torpedo spreads launched with exacting timing, and split-second judgment calls from men whose nerves were honed to razor-edge precision. USS Cavalla, commissioned on February 29, 1944, at the Electric Boat Company in Groton, Connecticut, was an untested participant in this deadly ballet. Among 73 Gato-class submarines destined for the Pacific, she was fresh off the slipway. Her crew was a patchwork of battle-hardened submariners and inexperienced sailors, each man grappling with the stark reality that the ocean was now both battlefield and executioner. Every maneuver, every decision carried weight. Here, the ocean didn't forgive mistakes, and the difference between life and death could be measured in seconds and degrees. June 17, 1944, 1950 hours. Commander Kossler gripped the periscope, the dim green glow of the radar console reflecting off his lined face. The sea was deceptively calm, a flat expanse of blue that betrayed none of the chaos churning beneath and above. Kavala's hydrophones picked up distant propeller thrum, a low rhythmic pulse that spoke of life, of movement, of Japanese warships somewhere out there, invisible but deadly. Every sailor in the control room felt the tension, the kind of silence that screamed louder than any gunfire. Kossler knew that success wasn't about heroics. It was about precision, approach angles calculated down to the last degree, torpedo spreads timed perfectly, depth charges anticipated. A single miscalculation and 311 feet of steel and the men aboard it would be reduced to drifting wreckage. At 1952, The first contacts appeared. 3 silhouettes on the horizon. Carriers, massive and imposing, their decks a hive of activity. Kavala was still submerged, her crew holding their breath. The calculus was brutal. Every decision could ripple outward, shaping the battle that would become the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Kossler whispered into the intercom, "Steady, wait for my mark." The torpedo officer, hands shaking slightly, loaded tubes 1 through 6, aligning them according to Kossler's meticulous plotting. Outside, the Japanese fleet was unknowingly steering into the path of history. Minutes stretched like hours. By 2003 hours, Kavala had closed to optimal firing position. Kossler exhaled slowly, then gave the order. "Fire 6 forward torpedoes." Spread, staggered. Track everything. The torpedoes left the tubes with barely audible clicks, invisible messengers of destruction. Down below, the submarine shuddered slightly from the release. On the surface, Japanese sailors went about their routines, oblivious that their fate had already been set in motion. Within moments, the first explosions ripped through the water. Kossler's calculations proved precise. 2 carriers were hit, 1 more narrowly escaped. The Japanese formation began to scatter, panic spreading like wildfire. Kavala dove deep, engines humming, listening to the chaos above. This was the opening act of the Marianas Turkey Shoot, and a single, untested submarine had just nudged the scales of history. Admiral Raymond Spruance read the incoming message with a mix of relief and urgency. The confirmation of Ozawa's fleet location was the key that could tip Operation Forager decisively in the Americans' favor. Spruance's staff immediately began plotting intercept courses for Task Force 58's carriers, arranging fighter and bomber sweeps with meticulous precision. Every second counted. Every minute Kavala remained in the vicinity increased the risk to Kossler and his crew. Back aboard Kavala, Kossler watched the enemy through the periscope. The Japanese carriers were still partially uncovered, planes lined up on flight decks, engines cold from recovery operations. Torpedo bombers and fighters could be spotted moving in and out of the catapults, unaware that a hunter lay hidden beneath the waves. Lieutenant Commander Risa calculated the approach. The submarine needed to submerge ahead of the Japanese formation, positioning herself so that the carriers would pass directly within torpedo range. It was a risky gambit. Too far ahead and Kavala might be left behind. Too close, and the submarine could be rammed or detected. At 22:15 hours, Kavala slipped beneath the surface, silent except for the faint hum of her engines. The night was pitch black, but the glow from deck lights and searchlights on the Japanese ships made the task both easier and more dangerous. Kossler ordered careful depth adjustments, keeping the periscope just below the waves to maintain visual contact without exposing the conning tower. As the enemy formation advanced, the crew held their positions like a single, precise instrument. The moment of truth was approaching, when the massive fleet would pass within the lethal embrace of Kavala's torpedo tubes. Every calculation, every second of training, every decision made since commissioning culminated here. Kossler whispered into the intercom, "Prepare to fire on my mark. This is what we trained for." By 22:30 hours, the first carriers were closing in, the unmistakable silhouettes cutting through the dark water. Kavala's torpedo officer had tubes primed and bearings set. The fate of the Philippine Sea hung on the edge of a knife, and one untested submarine commanded by a man who had already faced death more times than most could imagine was about to shape history. Kossler's hands tightened on the wheel. The moment had arrived. Kavala's sonar operators reported the screws cutting through the water, hull vibrations rising with every passing second. The Shokaku was moving at full speed, oblivious to the lethal predator lurking beneath. Lieutenant Commander Risa quickly ran the firing solutions, accounting for target speed, angle on the bow, and torpedo run times. 5 tubes ready. "Sir," Risa said, voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Spread pattern impact in 90 seconds. Kossler nodded, eyes never leaving the periscope. "Make it count. Remember what's at stake." The submarine surged forward on electric motors, silent and nearly invisible beneath the waves. Kavala's crew held their breath, the tension palpable in the sweltering control room. The torpedoes slipped from their tubes, disappearing into the black water like silent ghosts. Seconds felt like hours. Then, a series of muffled explosions reverberated through the hull. McClung's Shokaku shuddered violently, smoke erupting from the superstructure. The other two carriers were immediately on high alert, maneuvering frantically, but Kavala was already beginning her evasive dive. Depth gauges spun as the submarine dropped to 250 feet, engines on silent running. Damage report? Kossler demanded. Direct hit on the primary target, Risa replied. Secondary explosions observed. Other vessels maneuvering to evade. Torpedoes functioning as expected. Kossler allowed himself a brief nod. Kavala had delivered the crucial blow. The morning strike would now be delayed, disorganized, and partially destroyed. Across the Pacific, Task Force 58 would capitalize on this intelligence, positioning their 15 carriers for what would soon be called the Marianas Turkey Shoot. As Kavala slipped beneath the waves, the ocean's surface above erupted with anti-aircraft fire and smoke plumes. The Japanese carriers had no idea that a single submarine had just altered the balance of the Pacific War. Kossler's gamble, the months of training, the coordination of sonar, radar, and torpedoes had worked. The impact reverberated through Shokaku's hull. A fireball erupted from the deck, sending shrapnel and smoke into the sky. Kossler's crew felt the concussion even through Kavala's steel hull. The third torpedo struck near the aft hangar, detonating against fuel and munitions. Deck crew and aircraft were thrown into chaos. Shokaku heeled slightly, listing starboard as alarms blared. From the periscope, Costa could see Japanese sailors scrambling, some diving into the sea, others manning anti-aircraft guns. The destroyer Urakazi veered sharply, dropping depth charges and zigzagging to try and locate Kavala. But Kossler had already started the evasive maneuver, a silent dive to 300 feet, electric motors humming, reducing cavitation and noise. The crew's hands flew over the ballast controls as the submarine slipped beneath the waves, leaving only a rising plume of smoke to mark the carrier's plight. Status? Kossler demanded, voice tight. Confirmed hits, Risa replied. Carrier is crippled, possibly out of action for the day. Depth charges incoming from the destroyer. We need to run silent and fast. Kavala glided away under the shadow of the water, depth gauges rising and falling as the crew adjusted trim to evade detection. The tension was almost unbearable. One miscalculation and the boat could be crushed. Kossler allowed himself a brief breath. The gamble had paid off. The Shokaku, one of the largest Japanese carriers in the theater, had been effectively neutralized, directly contributing to the disruption of Japanese air operations that would define the Marianas Turkey Shoot. Every explosion rattled Kavala's hull, sending shockwaves through the crew's bones. Panels bent, gauges shattered, and small leaks in the hull sprayed salt water into the compartments. The boat trembled as if it were a living creature under attack. Crew members clung to anything solid, knuckles white, as the sonar operator strained to distinguish the destroyer's propeller noises through the chaos. Kossler gritted his teeth. Maintain depth. Steady as she goes! Rissa's hands flew across the ballast controls, trimming the boat to keep her stable. Electric motors hummed silently as Kavala crept deeper, riding below the destroyer's sonar detection cones. Every second felt like an eternity. One wrong move, one creak in the hull, and they would be the next names added to the Pacific War's growing list of lost submarines. As the 106th depth charge detonated, a massive shock shook Kavala violently. Bulkheads flexed, and water rushed in through a faulty seal. Men yelled to secure the leak, bailing and patching on the fly. One of the young sailors collapsed from heat stroke, his gasping breaths a reminder of how close they were to the edge. Hours felt like days. Slowly, the pounding ceased. The destroyers had exhausted their runs and moved back toward Shokaku's burning wreck. Kavala, battered but still seaworthy, hovered silently beneath the waves. Kossler allowed himself the briefest sigh of relief. They had survived, alive, intact, and with the knowledge that the Japanese fleet had been struck a crippling blow. The sound ripped through the water like a giant hammer striking metal. Kavala shuddered violently with each concussive boom, sending the already exhausted crew sprawling against bulkheads. The deafening roars were felt more than heard, a physical force that rattled teeth, vibrated ribs, and twisted stomachs. Through the thick hull, the submarine groaned under the stress, valves rattling and lights flickering. Kossler gritted his teeth, gripping the conning tower handrail. Steady! Maintain depth! His voice was hoarse, almost drowned out by the ringing in everyone's ears. Around him, sailors clutched anything solid, sweat pouring off their faces in the oppressive 120-degree F heat. The smell of hot metal and brine mixed with the faint, acrid scent of fuel vapor leaking into compartments. Risa yelled over the chaos. Forward torpedo room flooding is stabilizing, but we're taking on more weight. Ballast adjustments now. Men scrambled, hauling sandbags, opening valves, and shoving everything they could to counteract the flooding. Every second was a test of coordination, endurance, and sheer nerve. As the last echo of Shokaku's final explosion faded, a haunting silence settled over the crew, broken only by the groans of Kavala herself and the distant sonar hum of patrolling destroyers. The Japanese carrier, once a proud symbol of naval power, had been annihilated. And beneath the waves, the crew of Kavala, battered, exhausted, and nearly cooked alive, had survived to tell the story. As Kavala lurked in the deep, Kossler and his crew could only feel the aftermath rather than see it. The sonar registered debris tumbling and breaking apart in the water above them. Air bubbles from ruptured compartments rose in frantic streams, breaking the surface far above, evidence of the carnage that had claimed nearly all aboard the Shokaku. Every tremor, every distant splash of wreckage was a reminder of how close they had come to sharing the same fate. Inside the submarine, there was no cheering, no celebration, just a tense, quiet vigilance. The men were bone-tired, overheated, and flooded with adrenaline, acutely aware that the destroyers could return at any moment. Every creak of the hull, every bubble and ping in the sonar could be the last thing they ever heard. For the Japanese Navy, the loss of Shokaku and so many skilled aviators was more than just a tactical setback, it was catastrophic. Carrier-based aviation was the backbone of their Pacific strategy, and Air Group 601 had been among the best-trained, most experienced pilots in the fleet. With their deaths, the balance of naval air power shifted decisively. Kossler allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Not pride, as he whispered, "We did what we had to." Every decision, every calculated risk, had contributed to a blow from which the Japanese carrier force would never fully recover. Kavala remained submerged, silent, a predator in the abyss, witnessing the ripples of history she had helped create. Kossler's message was brief but consequential. Shokaku sunk. Carrier task group severely damaged, survivors rescued, Kavala intact. The report reached Admiral Raymond Spruance's staff, just as Task Force 58 prepared to engage the Japanese fleet. The intelligence Kavala had provided days earlier, combined with the destruction of Shokaku, allowed American carriers and their planes to strike with precision, leading to what history would call the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the annihilation of Japanese naval aviation in the Philippine Sea. For Kavala's crew, there was no celebration. They had survived a trial that few submariners ever faced, a perfect storm of detection, depth charging, and close-quarter attacks. Every man aboard knew that luck had been as essential as skill. Officers inspected the damage, patched leaks, and secured equipment while the exhausted sailors tended to minor injuries and dehydration. In the broader scope, Kossler's actions had shifted the Pacific War. Japanese carrier aviation, already stretched thin, would never recover from the loss of Shokaku and the pilots of Air Group 601. American naval aviation now had uncontested dominance, paving the way for the Saipan invasion and eventual advances across the Mariana Islands. Kavala limped back toward Pearl Harbor, battered but undefeated, carrying men who had faced the abyss and survived. Kossler, haunted by the deaths above and the choices he'd made, would spend the rest of the war ensuring that other submarines went to battle with the benefit of lessons he'd paid dearly to learn. Exactly. Kavala's attack on Shokaku and Albacore's strike on Taiho weren't isolated incidents, they were catalysts, in a perfect storm that obliterated Japanese carrier aviation in one engagement. The Marianas Turkey Shoot wasn't just a lopsided dogfight. It was a structural collapse of Japanese naval power, the combination of radar-guided Hellcats, superior American pilot training, and catastrophic losses of carriers and veteran pilots created a vacuum that Japan could never recover from. By the end of June 19, 1944, Japanese carriers Shokaku and Taiho sunk, losses compounded by damage to other carriers. Japanese naval aviators, from 3,500 at war's start to fewer than 500 remaining combat-ready carrier aircraft. Tens of thousands could be built, but trained pilots, the real limiting factor, were gone. American losses, only 23 planes. Minimal experienced pilot casualties, leaving carrier aviation dominance firmly in U.S. hands. The implications were immediate and strategic. Operation Forager, Saipan invasion, faced far less aerial opposition than it otherwise would have, securing a foothold in the Marianas and enabling U.S. bombers to strike the Japanese home islands. In effect, Kavala's torpedoes and the combined submarine air attacks had indirectly rewritten the Pacific War's trajectory. Exactly. Kavala's success wasn't just about bold seamanship, it was the culmination of technology, intelligence, and industrial might working in perfect concert. Torpedo technology. After years of Mark 14 failures, by mid-1944 the torpedoes were reliable. Magnetic exploders, depth controls, and contact fuses had been corrected, turning a once flawed weapon into a precise killer. Analog computing. The torpedo data computer allowed Kavala's crew to calculate complex firing solutions in real time, integrating the motions of the submarine, the target, and torpedo characteristics. What once would have required dozens of mathematicians could now be done at the flick of a lever. Industrial scale. American shipyards and torpedo factories produced massive numbers of submarines and ordnance with incredible precision. Each Mark 14 torpedo represented thousands of man-hours and intricate manufacturing tolerances, all replicable across hundreds of units. Intelligence superiority. Station Hypo and Pearl Harbor had cracked the Japanese JN-25 codes, giving U.S. commanders unprecedented visibility into fleet movements, ship assignments, and operational plans. Submarines were positioned not by luck, but by ultra-guided planning, making encounters like Kavala versus Shokaku almost inevitable. Pilot and crew training. Submarine crews were highly trained to exploit this technology and intelligence. Radar operators, periscope observers, and TDC specialists executed coordinated maneuvers under extreme pressure, turning precise data into lethal action. In short, Kavala's attack was a microcosm of all the elements that made U.S. naval operations in 1944 unstoppable: intelligence, technology, industrial output, and human skill converging at the right place and time. It shows how modern warfare had become not just about courage, but about systems integration on a massive scale. The scene at Saipan must have been almost surreal for Kossler and the crew of Kavala. After weeks of hunting in the vast Pacific, dodging destroyers and surviving depth charges, they arrived to witness the sheer industrial and military might of the United States projected onto a single battlefield. Naval concentration, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and carriers, all operating in coordinated strikes, were bombarding and providing air cover simultaneously. The synchronized firepower and logistics were unlike anything the Pacific had seen before. Air operations. Carrier air wings launched continuous sorties against Japanese positions, softening defenses and providing reconnaissance. From Kavala's periscope, it would have looked like a sea of aircraft constantly taking off and landing. Amphibious assault. Transports were unloading troops, vehicles, and supplies under the cover of naval gunfire. Smoke, dust, and fire created a chaotic but effective shield, demonstrating how joint operations had matured into a well-oiled machine. Kossler's patrol report, beyond description, captures the psychological impact. After months of stealth, precision attacks, and hunting in isolation, the crew saw the full scale of industrialized warfare in motion, a scale that dwarfed anything the Japanese could muster in the Pacific. It also underscores a crucial strategic reality. By this point, submarines like Kavala had already done their part to erode Japanese naval strength, making the massive amphibious operations possible with far less risk to American forces. Kavala wasn't just patrolling. It was part of a multi-layered system of attrition and coordination that crushed Japan's ability to resist. By August 1944, the psychological and strategic effects of Kavala's patrol were reverberating across the Pacific. The sinking of Shokaku was more than a tactical victory. It struck at the heart of Japanese naval morale and capability. Symbolic loss. Shokaku wasn't just a ship. She was a legend, having survived Coral Sea and Santa Cruz, and her air group was among the most experienced in the Japanese Navy. Her destruction shattered confidence in previously invincible carriers. Material and technical impact. The catastrophic vapor explosion highlighted a critical weakness in Japanese damage control. Proper ventilation could have prevented the disaster. In contrast, American ships repeatedly survived torpedo hits thanks to improved training, drills, and procedural discipline. The difference wasn't courage, it was industrial procedure and preparation. Psychological shock. Survivors and senior officers understood that Japan's carrier force could no longer be relied upon. Fuida Mitsuo's post-war reflection, "When we learned Shokaku was gone, we knew the war was lost," underscores the morale collapse. Even experienced commanders recognized that tactical setbacks could now snowball into strategic defeat. Strategic lessons learned or not learned. Ozawa's staff, including Captain Ome Toshikazu, realized that technical superiority, radar, reliable torpedoes, industrial capacity was decisive. Heroism and experience could no longer compensate for these deficits. This was a turning point. The Japanese Navy now faced a combination of crippled carrier aviation, lost experienced pilots, and the relentless advance of American industrial and technological power. Kavala's mission wasn't just a submarine patrol. It was a single cog in the machinery that systematically destroyed Japan's ability to project naval air power, a demonstration of how intelligence, technology, and precise action could outweigh sheer bravery or legacy. Exactly. The Marianas Turkey Shoot wasn't just a one-off tactical victory. It was strategic annihilation. Kavala's torpedo hits, combined with coordinated carrier strikes, created a cascading collapse of Japanese naval aviation. Pilot attrition, Air Group 601 lost 80% of its aircraft and veteran pilots, the backbone of Japanese carrier operations. Even if Japan built new carriers, they couldn't instantly replace experienced pilots, a crucial bottleneck in carrier warfare. Training collapse. Pre-war, Japanese carrier pilots trained 700 hours. After the Philippine Sea, replacements were flying with less than 100 hours, insufficient for advanced carrier operations. America, by contrast, was producing 100,000 pilots annually, each with 600-plus hours of training. This created a huge quantitative and qualitative advantage. Industrial and logistical superiority, U.S. training infrastructure, 139 air stations, 40,000 training aircraft, 100,000 instructors, an industrialized approach to air power. Japanese carriers could be replaced. Trained aviators could not. Kavala's attack and the broader submarine campaign directly accelerated this imbalance. Strategic consequence. The loss of Shokaku and Taiho, combined with the decimation of veteran pilots, meant the Imperial Navy would never again mount an effective carrier strike. Admiral Toyota Suimu understood immediately. Losing trained aviators was tantamount to losing the war. In essence, Kavala wasn't just sinking ships. She was systematically destroying Japan's ability to project naval air power, tipping the Pacific balance irreversibly toward the U.S. by war's end. American submarines had completely strangled Japan's maritime lifelines, achieving a level of strategic impact few weapon systems in history have matched. Submarine production and deployment. 8 submarines served in the Pacific. Actively patrolling by mid-1944, often in coordinated wolf packs, these boats sank 1,314 Japanese vessels totaling 5.3 million tons, more than half of all Japanese losses. Merchant fleet collapse. Japanese merchant shipping fell from 644 million tons, 1941 to 2.8 million tons, 1944. Japan required at least 3 million tons for civilian economy and another 3 million tons for military operations, shortfall. Crippled both sectors. Vital resources like rice, imports down from 144 million tons to 200,000, and oil from 5 million tons to 600,000, became critical shortages. Innovation driven by necessity, electric mark. 18 torpedoes eliminated telltale wakes. Homing. Mark 27 torpedoes could track enemy ships by sound. Radar evolved. SJ radar upgraded to ST radar, doubling range and resolution, enhancing night and poor visibility operations. Tactical desperation. Japanese destroyers resorted to suicide. Fuel runs from Singapore to Japan, deck-mounted. Barrels of aviation fuel, because tankers could not survive the submarine. Threat supply shortages directly undermined Japan's ability to sustain its military forces, accelerating defeat. Essentially, Kavala's attack at the Philippine Sea was the spark in a chain reaction that leveraged U.S. industrial capacity, intelligence, and technological innovation to systematically collapse Japan's naval and economic ability to fight. By the time Japan surrendered, Kavala had become a symbol of American undersea dominance. Operational record: 6 war patrols completed. 180 tons of shipping sunk, including high-value targets like Shokaku and Shimotsuki. No crew losses to enemy action across all patrols. An extraordinary feat in the Pacific theater. Technological: edge radar detection exceeded most Japanese surface vessels. ECM Mark II. Cipher machine encoded messages with 150 million possible combinations. No Japanese code reader ever decrypted an operational message. Torpedo systems, TDCs, and navigation tools continuously improved with each patrol, keeping U.S. submarines ahead of Japanese defenses. Strategic impact: Kavala's success, multiplied across 288 American submarines, decimated Japan's merchant fleet and starved its military and civilian economy. By 1945, U.S. submarines operated even in the Sea of Japan, previously considered a safe Japanese stronghold. The psychological impact on Japan was immense. Enemy subs could appear anywhere, even at daylight, undermining morale and operational planning. Final moments. On August 15, 1945, as Emperor Hirohito broadcast the surrender, Kavala was on lifeguard duty off Japan. A Japanese aircraft attacked despite the surrender, dropping 2 bombs that missed by 100 yards, a final, almost surreal reminder of the chaos that had persisted until the very end. In essence, Kavala exemplified the lethal combination of technology, intelligence, industrial might, and human skill that made American submarine warfare a decisive factor in Japan's defeat. It wasn't just a single ship's success, it was the culmination of a nationwide undersea war machine that ensured victory. By September 2, 1945, Kavala had come full circle, entering Tokyo Bay to witness Japan's formal surrender aboard USS Missouri. From her deck, the crew could see the full scale of Allied naval dominance: 12 undamaged American carriers, the centerpiece of a fleet that had systematically dismantled Japan's naval and merchant forces. Commander Kossler, now a captain, reflected on the transformation. "We started this war with obsolete torpedoes and peacetime training. We ended it as the most effective naval force in history. Every man who served in submarines can be proud that we strangled an empire." The statistics of submarine warfare tell the story. Japanese losses to U.S. submarines: 314 vessels sunk, totaling 5.3 million tons of shipping. Battleships sunk or damaged. Aircraft. Carriers sunk, including Shokaku. Cruisers sunk or damaged. Destroyers and escorts sunk. 60% of Japanese merchant marine destroyed. Crippling logistics, fuel, and food supplies. American submarine losses. Submarines lost: 45 to enemy action, 7 to operational accidents, 556 officers and men killed. 2% casualty rate, the highest of any U.S. service branch in the Pacific. Kavala's presence in Tokyo Bay symbolized more than victory. It represented the cumulative effect of intelligence, technology, and industrial mobilization that allowed American submarines to not only survive in a hostile environment, but to decisively shape the outcome of the Pacific War. The USS Cavalla today stands not just as a vessel, but as a living monument to both heroism and sacrifice. Visitors walking through her compartments experience the same narrow passageways, the periscope hatch, and the torpedo room where decisions with global consequences were made. Each creaking bulkhead, each valve and dial, tells the story of the men who operated in extreme danger for weeks on end, balancing life and death beneath thousands of feet of water. The restoration itself was a labor of love and dedication. $1,000 volunteer hours from submarine veterans and enthusiasts. Original equipment painstakingly sourced, refurbished, and reinstalled, efforts to maintain historical accuracy, capturing the conditions Kossler and his crew endured. Kavala is more than steel and machinery. It's a testament to the human element of war: courage, sacrifice, and endurance. The 1,272 men lost aboard Shokaku, the hundreds of submariners who faced depth charges, and the families left in uncertainty are all memorialized within her hull. Every visitor walking through the submarine is reminded that victory came at enormous human cost, and that the small, determined crew of a single boat could decisively influence the course of a global conflict. The 1994 reunion of USS Cavalla's crew was a profound moment in naval history, blending memory, reflection, and reconciliation. With only 47 of the original 80-man crew remaining, the gathering highlighted both the human cost of war and the bonds forged under extreme circumstances. Commander Kossler, at 82, reflected on the extraordinary achievement. "We were young men given an impossible task: find and sink the enemy fleet with one small submarine. We succeeded through training, courage, and luck. But we must remember that our enemies were also brave men doing their duty. We honor our victory without celebrating their deaths." In a gesture almost unthinkable during wartime, Japanese survivors were invited, allowing former adversaries to share memories and recognize the shared human experience behind the conflict. Tears, handshakes, and stories bridged decades of enmity, turning the reunion into a testament to respect, remembrance, and the enduring power of reconciliation. Historically, the sinking of Shokaku by Kavala was decisive. Beyond eliminating a carrier with symbolic weight as a Pearl Harbor veteran, it removed irreplaceable air group expertise, crippling Japanese carrier aviation. Dr. Samuel Eliot Morrison summarized the tactical significance. Kavala's sinking of Shokaku was perfectly timed and executed. Coming during the Philippine Sea battle, it contributed to the virtual annihilation of Japanese carrier aviation. The reunion, the preserved submarine, and the surviving veterans together ensure that the story of courage, precision, and humanity in the face of war is remembered for generations. Rear Admiral Herman J. Kossler's passing on July 1, 1988, at age 76, closed the chapter on a life that had directly shaped naval history. His leadership aboard Kavala had not only sunk a symbol of Japanese naval power, Shokaku, but had also demonstrated the strategic impact of submarine warfare, showing that a single small vessel, expertly commanded, could cripple an entire branch of an enemy's military capability. Japanese historians, like Professor Tanaka Hiroaki of the Japanese Defense University, emphasize the broader consequences. The loss of Shokaku and Taiho in a single day destroyed more than ships. It destroyed irreplaceable expertise, institutional knowledge, and the operational capacity of Japan's carrier force. This lesson echoes through modern naval planning. Aircraft carriers, while formidable, remain vulnerable to asymmetric threats like submarines. Today, carrier groups deploy multiple layers of anti-submarine defenses: helicopters with dipping sonar, attack submarines scouting ahead, and advanced electronic detection systems, because the cat and mouse game initiated by Kavala and Shokaku persists beneath the ocean's. Kossler's legacy endures not only in historical records, but in the continuing evolution of naval strategy. He exemplified precision, courage, and foresight, qualities that transformed the submarine force into one of the decisive instruments of the Pacific War. The lessons learned aboard Kavala remain relevant. Even the largest, most powerful vessels are only as secure as the crews and strategies protecting them. Kossler's final public words at the 1987 Kavala reunion perfectly encapsulate the philosophy behind the submarine campaign: duty over glory, strategy over bravado, and collective effort over individual heroics. He emphasized that the true victory of the submarine force was not merely the sinking of Shokaku or other enemy ships, but the demonstration of what a free society could achieve when ordinary people, farmers, factory workers, and students alike, were united by purpose, training, and innovation. The USS Cavalla today in Galveston stands as a living testament to that effort. Walking through her compartments, visitors encounter more than torpedo tubes and control panels. They experience the ingenuity, courage, and cooperation required to operate a complex war machine under lethal conditions. Kossler's hope was that future generations would understand that victory in war and in life is often won by preparation, intelligence, and the ability to work together, rather than sheer force alone. The museum also commemorates the ultimate sacrifice: the 52 American submarines lost during World War II, and their 3,556 officers and men, those who remain on eternal patrol in the Pacific. Kossler's reflection reminds us that every tactical success came at a profound human cost, and that the lessons of courage, innovation, and moral responsibility endure far beyond the battles themselves. Exactly. Kavala is more than a submarine. It's a living monument to human ingenuity, courage, and the consequences of war. Walking through her tight metal corridors, visitors are physically immersed in the environment where 80 young Americans faced impossible odds. Every instrument, dial, and periscope tells a story of precision, training, and split-second decision-making that could mean life or death. The battle flag and 6 small Japanese flags commemorate her victories, but the memorial room shifts the focus from triumph to sacrifice, honoring the 52 American submarines lost and the 3,556 officers and men who never returned. It's a sobering reminder that every tactical victory in war carries a human cost. At the same time, the story transcends national lines. Kossler and his crew were up against brave sailors defending their homeland. Kavala demonstrates how technology, industrial might, and sheer human determination intersected to change the course of history. For modern visitors touching the submarine, reading the names and seeing the instruments of war connects them not just to World War II, but to the enduring lessons of courage, innovation, and responsibility in the face of overwhelming odds. Exactly. Your paragraph captures the essence of Kavala's legacy beautifully. You've highlighted technology, training, courage, and industrial capacity as the key elements that turned an ordinary submarine crew into a force capable of reshaping the Pacific War. If you want, I can help you polish it slightly so it flows even more like a museum plaque or narrated exhibit, keeping the drama and impact but tightening the sentences for maximum effect. Here's one possible version. These experiences connect us to a time when ordinary people accomplished extraordinary feats. On June 19, 1944, USS Cavalla's successful attack became a defining moment in American submarine warfare and a decisive contribution to victory in the Pacific. What began as just another fleet boat from Electric Boat Company became a symbol of how technology, training, and courage could overcome a determined enemy defending their homeland. The destruction of Shokaku was not merely a tactical victory, it was the embodiment of American industrial might, technological innovation, and the skill of citizen sailors mastering complex weapons to defeat totalitarian aggression. That day, Kavala's torpedoes found their mark and changed the course of history forever.